What is compare and contrast writing? When people say compare, they often refer to both the similarities and the differences, but contrast is specifically where differences. How do we use it? Sometimes people do evaluations with compare and contrast writing. This means that they identify which is better, but that isn't necessary. It is possible to focus only on how things are similar or different without indicating that one is better than the other. Think about comparing two friends. They are similar in some ways and different in some ways, but one doesn't have to be a better friend than the other. They can both be great friends. In our next lecture, we will focus more on special vocabulary and grammar for compare and contrast writing. But note that ER words are often used. That's words that end in ER. Examples are smaller or funnier. And also we use words that start with more, such as more generous or more famous. These are called comparative adjectives. Try to avoid words like better, but focus on what qualities make them better, like longer or faster. For any kind of writing in American academic situations, the general format is introduction, body paragraphs, followed by a conclusion. For longer essays, the introduction and conclusion are both separate paragraphs, and there are several body paragraphs. For example, in a longer compare and contrast essay, there will be one paragraph for each similarity and one for each difference. Each paragraph will begin with its own topic sentence and be filled with supporting details and examples, and end with a conclusion sentence. For this online writing course, we will practice writing compare and contrast paragraphs. So for our practice and for your homework assignment, we will write one 200-word paragraph. If you write all of these sections, but you still haven't written 200 words yet, you can add more details or examples. You can also add another similarity or difference. The topic sentence informs the reader of the general topic and indicates the direction of the paragraph. For example, in this case, it indicates that you know there are similarities and also differences. Note that the topic sentence needs to match the order of the supporting points. If you mention similarities and then differences in your topic sentence, then you should write about similarities before differences in the body of your paragraph. For example, if the topic is compare and contrast two of your friends, you could write John and Tom are the same in many ways, but they are different in many ways too. Note that I've used a contrastive conjunction here, the word but. It's very helpful in these kinds of sentences. As for the conclusion sentence, it also restates the main idea but it could also make it more personal. So the format is similar to the topic sentence. You could write, while Tom and John are really similar, they are also quite different. Notice the key word here is while, which starts the dependent clause and moves to the independent clause. They are also quite different. Now this is good, but you could personalize it and make it better. For example, in conclusion, Tom and John are both great friends, but I appreciate their differences. Or you could say, in conclusion, John and Tom are both wonderful people, but their differences are unmistakable. And I could put an adjective at the end there. There's different ways of writing it, but I'm using the same format as a topic sentence, including both differences and similarities in my sentence, and indicating what I'm comparing and contrasting. I'm also adding a little bit more of a personal conclusion to it. This is the body of the paragraph. It comes after the introduction and before the conclusion. The supporting points for the similarities and differences will identify and explain the exact similarities and differences. However, the format is different. Notice that for the similarities, we use the word both and a shared adjective for the similarities, as well as the things that we're comparing. For example, John and Tom are both kind. But for the format of the differences, I mention one of the friends first, and then the be verb plus a comparative adjective using er or more. And I end with the other friend. For example, John is funnier than Tom. If you wanted to make the contrast more clear, you could include two opposite adjectives plus a contrastive conjunction but. And then you could write, John is funny, but Tom is boring. However, if both of your friends are funny, but John is funnier, then the first example is better. John is funnier than Tom. In the body of the paragraph, it's very useful to introduce each section with a general sentence so the reader knows what's going to happen next. You need a sentence that introduces each of those sections. In our short paragraph, that could be a short sentence that says, there are many similarities, and later there are also differences. If you're writing a larger essay, that brief sentence would actually be the topic sentence of each paragraph. But for now, it's just a really short sentence. I've written an example for the similarity of kindness. Notice that I answer the questions, how is John kind? And how is Tom kind? And then in my examples, I share a small story. I've color-coded these so you can see that the general statement is green, and here is the general statement. First, there are many similarities. And then I give my support here is underlined, support here, the first point. My main point being that John and Tom are both kind. And then I have details in the red and examples in blue. So first, there are many similarities. John and Tom are both kind. John is nice to animals, and Tom is very kind to elderly people. For example, when I forgot my lunch last week, John shared his sandwich with me, and Tom gave me half of his Coke. Here are some suggestions for advanced writers. Popular transition words are first, second, last, however, in contrast, in conclusion. For all of these, you need to have a comma right after them. In conclusion is used at the very end to indicate that you are making your conclusion. This is important if you want to be very clear. Sometimes it's not always clear when a person is making their conclusion. Another word that is a key word you'll find in compare and contrast is both. This is for showing similarities. There's several different ways of using it. For example, here we have both of, which is followed by a plural noun, and then the be verb. For example, both of them, both of the students are, both of them are. Actually, you could use any kind of verb there. Both of them like, both of them hate. The other option here is both noun and noun followed by a verb. Both Sarah and John, both Tom and Sue, both the car and the dog are in the house, near the house. Both the car and the dog are new. And here we have both followed by a verb. If you're going to use it this way, it's important to make sure that who you're referring to with both is clear. So both is a pronoun in this case. If I've already been talking about John and Sarah and I say both are from New York City, then you know that I'm talking about John and Sarah. And then here we have another one. This is where you would use both further into the sentence, after a verb, before an adjective. For example, John and Sarah are both tall. In this case, it's not necessary that I would use both, but this is a way you might use it in more complex writing. So keep that in mind, and on the next page, keep an eye out for each of these examples of transition words. Here's an example paragraph where we can look at the components that we've discussed. First, I want to point out the comparative adjectives and phrases that I used. For example, both kind and both are good in school. These are the two main supporting points for the similarities. Then I have the differences, funnier and more generous. These are the two big differences that I've chosen to talk about. I also want to point out this sentence that I've underlined. It says, I met both of them when I moved to the city 12 years ago. This is the context, background information. It follows a topic sentence and adds a little bit more background information, so the reader can understand the situation and maybe how long you've known them or where you met them or something like that. After that, I have the similarity introduction section. First, there are many similarities. And as I mentioned before, I have the first main similarity. And then I follow that with the example that I mentioned already. And then I jump into the next similarity. They're also both good in school. And then I have an example of that. Both of them get good grades. And then I talk about an example, a story. They both got top grades in calculus last semester. And then I add on a point to that as a very hard class, which was interesting that they both got good grades in it. And then I talk about my first main difference. This is the introduction to the differences section. And then I have my first point. John is funnier than Tom. And then I give an example. He makes me laugh every day. And then I mention that Tom is more generous than John. And my example is that Tom will let anyone use his new toys. And I give another example is he often gives money to poor people. And then I have my conclusion at the end. Tom and John are both great friends, but I appreciate their different qualities. Note that this is 143 words long. If I had more space, I would add more details and examples. This is the end of the first lesson on essay types. Next week, we will work on descriptive writing. Enjoy.